Hi everyone, and welcome to our newest webinar, Can Microsoft Teams Really Be Your Intranet? Today I'm joined by David Salter from LiveTiles and Microsoft Modern Workplace Specialist, Jason Chisholm. And I'll hand it over to them in a second, but just a couple of housekeeping things. We'll address all questions at the end, but feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll keep track of them there. And also, please don't hesitate to reach out after the webinar with any questions. You'll be receiving the recording and the slide deck then as well. All right, thank you, and over to you, David.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today to attend this webinar. We do very much appreciate it. A little bit of background on myself. David Salter, I'm the Director of Technology Solutions at LiveTiles. Really, my job is just to understand what the broad needs of industry are as it relates to modern workplace and digital workplace, and align those needs to the capabilities of the LiveTiles platform. And I do that across our customers and our partner network. I'm joined today very kindly by Jason from Microsoft, Jason, if you could just say a quick hello to everyone, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone, and hope everybody is doing well. Definitely glad to be joining our partners at LiveTiles to talk about what I think is a very valuable conversation. As my title says, I'm a modern work specialist here at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I spent about 23 years in the partner ecosystem, and that experience gave me a lot of visibility into a lot of different organizations as to how folks were adopting technology. So my joining Microsoft was a natural evolution within my career, and since joining the organization, we continue to innovate and have positive impact within the business community around us. And I'm just delighted to be here supporting David on this discussion.
Thanks very much, Jason. I think what I always like to start with, especially with a topic like this, which is really around intranet as a core communication platform for organizations, is why. And without going into all the data that we could provide around this, it is absolutely clear from our client base that when the pandemic hit, our customers that had invested in solutions like Teams, like a good intranet, were much better equipped to handle the very rapid transformation that occurred. Now, the world's moved on, and we've all moved on to other ways of doing these things, but the message still remains the same, and that is that engaged employees who understand the mission, the vision, what's happening across the business, who are informed about products, the services, deliver better outcomes for their customers. And of course, that is what drives the success of the broader business. So a very simple proposition is that intranets are an absolutely critical part of an effective communication stream in a business. I would say without them, and without the effective internal communications, that is when chaos can really ensue for a business. A little bit of context as to why we're exploring this topic. Just before I sort of talk about where Teams is at now, I want to sort of talk about this from a problem perspective of what problem we're solving as it relates to Teams. First of all, let's take it from the perspective of the content creator. Now, in most of our clients, that is referring to folks in roles across corporate communications, human resources, marketing, and of course, in any other part of the organization that has a need to effectively organize and present useful and valuable information to other people in the business. As Microsoft Teams has been so incredibly adopted, and in fact, that number of 75 million that I've got up there is a little bit out of date, what's happened is very simple. The amount of time that folks are spending in the Teams app has rapidly increased. So if you think about this from a communicator's perspective, and you've got an objective to get useful, valuable messages out there to people, you've got to think of it from the perspective of getting it to where people are working. And that very much has prompted the topic of today's call, which is, can Teams be the intranet interface? The second thing is from the user's perspective, what problem are we solving? If you're a user and you're in Teams all day, you're doing your chatting, your file sharing, your conferencing, the more times that you need to switch context, jump out of Teams into another app to get a piece of information, perhaps to another system to get something else, do a process, do a form, the more times that you are switching context, the more that impacts your productivity and efficiency as you go about your workday. Not only that, it's just frustrating to have so many different apps. Now, the reason why we think that this is important is because Microsoft have been very clear that Teams is not just a platform for file sharing and conferencing and calling and chat. It's a much broader platform for things like targeted channel-based communications and, importantly, for surfacing other apps. So there is our opportunity to solve that problem of the context switching. And the way that I would like to frame it is that Teams genuinely, through the connectors and integration framework that Microsoft are offering to us, has the opportunity to become a place that forms a single pane of glass around a lot of disparate applications. So from the end user's perspective, we think that the case for Teams to become the new intranet, and in fact, more than the intranet, the hub of the digital workplace, is very much one that is almost completely made out. On that point, just like to stop just for a quick insight from Jason from a Microsoft perspective on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, I would actually echo a lot of what you just said there. I think the thing that's important for the attendees to understand is that, number one, when we talk about modern work really is a combination of tools that we create at Microsoft, all of which have very specific purposes, whether it's security, productivity, communication, or collaboration. Teams is a very important piece of that, right? And it's probably one of the areas, along with security, where Microsoft is continuing to make significant investments on a very regular basis, right? The aspirational direction that we as an organization have for Teams is that Teams is that platform that every individual within an organization is using to communicate and collaborate. So it's not just a video conferencing tool. It's not something that is just it's there to compete with some of the other things that are out there from a meeting standpoint. It's actually the way many of us here at Microsoft run our business from a day-to-day. It's how we create documents, how we share documents, how we interface with our colleagues, how we interface with our customers on a regular basis. And there is no sign of that momentum slowing down. As a matter of fact, if anything, this current pandemic that we are all dealing with has only accelerated the pace at which we are innovating. The pace of adoption, as you saw, the number that David shared earlier, which is a little bit out of date, is only increasing, right? And so as you listen to what David and the LiveTiles team are talking about today, what I would invite you all to do is two things. One, know that our investments within Teams are solid and are only going to continue, and know that aspirationally, what we ask people to do is remember that it really is a platform for collaboration, creation, and communication. It is not just a endpoint video solution, which you're going to hear more about that today as David goes into how Teams can be a very effective intranet tool for organizations.
Thanks, Jason. So it really does, beg the question of, how can Teams be more effective? And it's a pretty simple proposition. If I'm working there all day, why should I go elsewhere for all these things listed below? And I've really divided it up into two things. The common organizational resources that you would typically associate with an employee portal intranet solution, things like news, industry news, directory, upcoming events, forms, templates, policies, procedures, all of these things that are very common to us. They are all able to be effectively surfaced in Teams. And then really, I think the more exciting area is the fact that Teams is extensible. And we're doing a lot of work with clients at the moment who are saying, hey, listen, we've got all these other apps out there. We've got HR systems. wouldn't it be great if we could surface a subset of content from the HR system? Let's say the ability to view your leave balance, the ability to make a request for leave, as a manager, the ability to approve leave. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could do that from Teams without needing to actually go to the specialist HR application? Or if I work in sales, wouldn't it be wonderful if I was able to update some of my core opportunities from the CRM platform right from Teams? Or for a third example, one of the other areas that we're doing a lot of work with clients on is around IT service management. Wouldn't it be great if from Teams I could check the status of my existing service tickets, or I could request a new service ticket? So the fact that Microsoft have opened up a lot of opportunities for this really gives us that second column of what I'm calling the personal workday essentials. And we'll certainly cover off some of this in a demonstration later. You'll see an actual real thing here. This is just some screenshots for the follow-up documentation that we will sell. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, but this is something that we'll send through after the meeting. This really gives you an idea of the role that Teams is able to play as it relates to supplementing a traditional intranet, and why we think the opportunity for that is different. And it takes the perspective of teams, projects, communities, committees, all of these different areas. And it's certainly a nice model that you can have a look through later. Some common questions that we always get asked by clients who are looking into this. So I'd imagine a lot of the people on today's call, if not SharePoint intranets, have experience with intranets on other web platforms. And no matter what web platform you are implementing, one of the starting points is information architecture and a logical taxonomy of content that makes things usable, easily discoverable, and logical. Pretty basic stuff when it comes to an intranet. And one of the questions that we always get asked is, well, does that apply to Teams? And the answer is absolutely yes, it does. Any organization that is going to invest in a Teams-based intranet is still going to need to do the critical work of defining their content strategy. So what information have we got that if we can effectively organize it and present it will add value to the business? There's no way around that. And secondly, how should we actually do it from a structural perspective in Teams with things like navigation? Those things aren't going away. A little side note on that is that one of the limitations with kind of presenting traditional web page-based content in Teams up till now has been around navigation and sort of injecting in mega menus and headers and that type of thing. If anyone had followed the announcements from Ignite that Microsoft made a month or two ago, there were some really positive changes around home sites and the ability to kind of pin the traditional intranet experience in Teams, which is really going to make that navigation experience easier. So where navigation is a very critical part of information architecture, that is something that has now been addressed. Another question that we get around Teams relates to the fact that the primary use case for Teams, and where almost, in fact, all of our clients start with Teams, is around team level collaboration. So a group of people with a common goal around a project or a department set up a team, they share files, they chat, and they do those types of things. So, how does intranet content relate to that? The answer is that we see the opportunity there is to separate out the intranet from that. You would still click through to your Teams and do all of the things that you normally would through the standard UI, through your chatting, your file sharing, your messaging. That doesn't change whatsoever. What we're suggesting though is that you would inject, whether it's a home site, whether it's some of the things that we're going to show you with LiveTiles today, you would inject a custom app into the sidebar of Teams, available in the desktop app or the mobile app, and that becomes the place where you access the formal curated content of the intranet. Probably the third most common question we get is, does SharePoint remain relevant? And the answer is absolutely it does. Not just because SharePoint is the place where documents live that are surfaced in Teams, but more generally, there are other elements which I'll share with you today that are injected into the application that are still based on things like lists and libraries and web parts, and very importantly, the concept of web pages which come from SharePoint. So in terms of how you might structure this within an intranet app, I think the starting point for us is really to define the globally relevant content. What is the stuff, what is the information, and what are the resources that, if you can organize them effectively inside of Teams, will broadly make sense for most people in the business. And you can see there some very predictable things. Your targeted channel-based communications, which we know are critical for relevance. Relevance equals people feeling that the intranet is a place where they can get things that matter to them. They're not going to be overwhelmed with communications that are irrelevant to them. And of course, relevance is what drives ongoing adoption and is what will drive your return on investment in an intranet platform. So internal communications, social features, directory events. Step one is to define how that would look inside of your organization. And once you've done that, you can say, okay, this is what we're going to present globally, and I'll share some examples. The second thing to do is to take a step back and say, okay, we've defined the globally relevant content, but what are the things that an individual does every day that relate very much to them? And some classic examples of this are My News. So surfacing only the relevant content as it relates to the individual. Perhaps it's based on their role within the organization. Perhaps it's based on the department they're in. If you're in a global company, perhaps it's based on what country they're in. And that may even be down to a kind of a language translation specific level, and something that I will share shortly of what we can do. So that's one example. And then there's of course other things like My Alerts. As I discussed earlier, one of the problems that we all need to face in the current modern workplace is the number of disparate apps. We're doing a lot of work with customers and partners to surface notifications from disparate systems. Something's happened in the IT service system, something's happened in the CRM system, but to surface that notification in Teams, allow you to take the action so that you don't need to traverse and context switch to another app. So, or it might be something like, for example, My Documents, something as simple as that, giving a person one-click access to all of the most recent documents that they have worked with across disparate 365 sources like Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So that, as I mentioned, the second part here is really to define what is going to be relevant to individuals as they go about the challenges and tasks of their workday. The third piece, which we can't ignore here, is really around the standard use case of internal and external collaboration. As I mentioned, we think that Microsoft have done a pretty wonderful job there, and that largely it would be used out of the box. If we were to make one recommendation, it is that you put in place some governance around that for some very obvious reasons. Just to give you a few, in this third level of the intranet of internal external collaboration, some reasons to do governance, usability and discoverability. If people are being added to tens, hundreds, thousands of teams, it genuinely becomes difficult to manage. So a bit of governance where the organization agrees in a very structured way around what type of activity constitutes the creation of a team. How will we apply some metadata to that to allow us to provide a kind of filtering and a discovery experience around that is something that will absolutely improve this element of the intranet. And of course, when we're talking about external collaboration, some governance around that can be very critical to ensure that no sensitive information is accidentally shared with third parties outside of the organisation. So to recap, we've got a recommended mechanism for developing your team's intranet. Part 1 is your globally relevant content. Part 2 is your individual or personally relevant content. And then part 3 is how do you tie it all together with the standard use case of Teams around internal and external collaboration. This is just a bit of information on the different products, but I'd like now, just with the remaining minutes, to jump into a demonstration. So you should be able now to see my screen, and you can see here what you're looking at is a sample intranet built in the traditional SharePoint. Now, when I go over to here, what you're about to see is that a large number of those features from the traditional intranet are now able to be surfaced inside of Teams in a very elegant, curated way. So you can see here in the LiveTiles intranet for Teams here, we've got access, for example, to my Power BI with a single click. These are just examples. This is certainly something that you would define specifically for your organisation. But let's go back to something even more basic. What about the news? Well, as I mentioned, corporate communicators from a problem-solving perspective, they really need to reach people where the eyeballs are and where they are working. So the ability to push that news into Teams, to do it in a very targeted way, and what I mean by that is allowing some level of subscription, or in many cases, as you can see here with the Everyone channel, prescription to certain areas of content is going to be absolutely critical to the experience of delivering an intranet and Teams news is something that is obviously essential and one of the 101 features. A few other things, you know, what about an intranet 101 feature like directory? Why should you have to traverse back to the intranet for that? It really should be available from the Teams interface. And you can see here that we have done that and made that available. Just as a side note to this, one of the things that we're doing at LiveTiles is not just around great presentation of employee profile data, but what I would argue is the more important piece is how do you actually make sure that the data in there is true, accurate, and up to date. So if anyone on the call today is trying to solve that problem, then certainly get in touch with us and we can talk about our LiveTiles directory management solution, which can help you manage in a very validated and structured way information around user profiles across sources like AD and SharePoint Online user profiles. So that's another one. Or it might be if we come away now from the common intranet features, it might be you know, showing an individual the certain apps that they have chosen to pin to their dashboard in Teams, you know, the ability to create a personal link. Or it might, for example, be the ability to access all of your documents. These are just a selection of samples to get your minds running about what you could do for your organization. There are no right or wrong here. There's just options, and we can certainly help you plan out what your team's intranet would look like. The next thing I want to demonstrate focuses very much on the broader, or what I'd say the more narrow, but I would think easier starting point of just corp comms, announcement publishing, critical update publishing. What we've built is a dedicated content publishing solution that we call Reach for Teams. And what this does is really enable you to add that element of formal, curated, targeted content into the intranet experience. So just by way of example, as a corporate communications person, I'm able to come in and generate an article. In this case, I'm going to target the Dallas job site. This is a fantastic solution for if anyone on the call has first line deskless workers who are going to be living in the mobile app of Teams all day. It is an excellent experience, so I'm going to put out an important update to them. I'm going to grab some sample content, a bit of fun. I've got lots of different formatting options that I don't have in other areas of Teams. I can insert images, videos from Stream, documents. I can even embed my own custom features with HTML and JavaScript, lots of different options there. And built into this, we've got some additional smarts that really add that element of completeness to a communications. What do I mean by that? I mean things like the ability to ask readers for confirmation, and I mean abilities things like the ability to generate an alert, which you can see I'm doing here. I'm now going to go and apply this. It's going to go to folks who are on the Dallas job site, who are on the product team and the marketing team and the sales team. You can see here we've got a lot of other smarts built in around publishing date, expiration date, and I'm going to go and publish that. Now, the effect of that is it'll generate an alert out to the app, and if I go back to my consumer view here, you can see here that that article is now available. I would take the action from a completeness perspective that has been required of me as an end user, and importantly, as a content creator, I am able to get insights and reports as to how effective my communication has been. There's so many different things I could show you here today, whether it's across news, posts, pages, events, all of these wonderful ways that we can present this formal and curated content in Teams. We're going to run out of time for that today, but what I would encourage everyone to do is please get in contact with us. The contact details are in the deck that will be sent out, and I'll bring that up on the screen shortly. And we can certainly explore any of the specific problems you are solving for in your organization, and we can sit down with you in a completely free, obligation free discovery session, and we can talk about how that might look inside of your world. Just before I finish there, I just remembered one of the other things that I think is really important is if you're on the call today and you're from an organization that is multinational, then one of the things that I talked about is this ability for end users to modify their language preference. So I'm now going to change my language preference. Let's go with Spanish. And what this is going to do is going to completely automate the translations of language for me. And you'll be able to see here that through Microsoft Azure Language Translation Services, the content that was once in English is now fully translated. Now, the value of this to a business is immense, not just from an efficiency gain perspective, in the sense that people can create content once in one language and have it available elsewhere, but it also has benefits in terms of the fact that you don't have delays in waiting for the information to go out to your disparate geographies around the world. They can go out very quickly, and the immediacy of and the importance of that information is felt when it's created. So if anyone on the call is from a multinational organization or one that does have needs around different languages, and you are exploring Teams for your intranet, then this is certainly something that will be able to supplement that. So we're almost at time. In terms of getting in touch, please do so. As I mentioned, we would really welcome the opportunity to sit down with you, learn a bit about the specific challenges that you are solving for, and we will run through that in a very methodical way with you. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time today. Jamie and I will be monitoring any of the questions that have come in, and we will be following up with you individually to provide answers to those. Otherwise, this will conclude the webinar, and thank you again for your attendance.